Very pleasant evening to all. Welcome to First Malaysian Freedom Summit 2015. On behalf of the organizers, I welcome and thank to everyone for your time in joining us in today's discussion. I would also like to welcome and honor our three interesting speakers who are going to share their thoughts, insights, and opinions for today's topic, which is Malaysian politics and freedom of expression, balancing power. Before we proceed, let me brief you a little bit about our panelists today. I will start with our first speaker, Professor Azmi Sharom. He is an associate professor in Faculty of Law, University of Malaya. His area of expertise are in Malaysian and international environmental law and conflict of law, a dedicated teacher, a dedicated practitioner of the law, and honest academicians who will not hesitate to call a spade a spade. He's the first academician to ever be charged with Sedition Act in Malaysia due to his legal opinion on the Khalid Ibrahim drama, if I'm not mistaken. The second panelist today, we have YB Ramkarpal. He's a Malaysian lawyer and politician, born in political background family. He's the son of late Karpal Singh and brother of Puchong MP YB Gobind Singh Yo and Penang Adun for Datuk Keramat Jabit Singh Yo. YB Ramkarpal was elected as the member of Bukit Global Constituency and sworn as member of Parliament on 10 of July 2014. He defended Anwar Ibrahim in his second sodomy criminal charge also. And last but not least, our third panel, Madam Abdullah, a prominent voice for civil rights in Malaysia, and inveterate activist champions issues relating to the advocacy and lobbying, mainstreaming gender and equality into national policies and the legislation of women in Malaysia through a not-for-profit women and human rights organization known as Empower Selangor. And she is well known as chairperson of Persib 2.0, the Coalition for Clean and Fair Election. She led the 34 hours so-called illegal rally during Merdeka Day. So I still can remember she loudly saying Persib. Okay. So today the format, the flow, actually we will ask three questions, one for each panelist, before we open the Q&A to the floor. So with the topic Malaysian politics and freedom of expression, balancing power. Basically, the idea of freedom of expression conjures images of Socrates asking awkward and unanswerable questions in the marketplace of Athens. In Malaysia, the year 2014 saw Malaysians standing up, exercising the rights guaranteed under the Federal Constitution, including freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Malaysia has seen a concerted crackdown on the freedom of expression in 2014 and had escalated even further in 2015 this year. The rising of intolerances among religions and races, political crackdowns, restriction on newer media, and legal tightening controls strike an impression of imbalanced power in Malaysia. So to relate the importance and challenges that Malaysian people are facing nowadays and how far can we settle this issue for a better Malaysia, let's hear it from them. With the first question, I would like to dedicate for Professor Azmi. Without conflicting ideas, there will be no good ideas, I think, quoted from Professor Azmi himself. Freedom of expression is vital in nation development. In fact, to achieve Vision 2020 as a developed nation, freedom is also another measure we need to fight and push for maturity. So Professor Azmi, how is the right to freedom of expression has been integrated in Malaysian law and politics, and how our parliament and courts have attempted to strike a balance between this freedom and other fundamental rights? Please.
Thank you, Farhan. That's a very big question. I think the first place to start is, of course, to look at our Constitution. And Article 10 is what guarantees our freedom of expression. Now, it doesn't really matter what law you have, because I think this concept of the freedom of expression and whether our system of law and whether our system of government respects the freedom of expression is not something which can easily be put into a statute or a law. It has to be something which is much more deeper than that. Let me give you an example. In the Sunday Times case, this was in the late 1970s, the European Court held that the freedom of expression is not something which you have to defend against a law which restricts it. That means to say, if you have a law which restricts freedom of expression, it's not right that you have to say, oh, well, you know, you can't do this. We have freedom of expression, and we try to defend the freedom of expression against the law. In fact, it should be the other way around. Any laws which restrict the freedom of expression has to be justified. That is to say, the presumption, the assumption is that freedom is good, and freedom is there, and is to be respected. Therefore, if you're going to have a law which restricts that freedom, it is not for you to justify your freedom. It is for the lawmakers to justify the law. If you get what I'm saying. But this works on the presumption that you value the freedom of information, you value the freedom of expression. This works on the presumption that you think that freedom is a good thing. Therefore, any restriction of the freedom has to be justified. And that is the problem that I see in this country. It's not so much the laws. Yes, the laws are very, very bad. But how did these laws get made in the first place? These laws get made in the first place because there isn't that necessary appreciation for freedom amongst the lawmakers themselves. So when you don't appreciate freedom, you don't care whether it's restricted too much. You don't care whether it's restricted over the top. You don't care. As far as you're concerned, what do I need to be able to do what I want to do? And therefore you make the laws to make it easier for you to do whatever it is that you want to do, regardless on the damage that it does to the freedom of expression. Okay? So for me it's very difficult because it's really about something deeper than just making the statute. Okay, let me give you another example, right? Now assembly is also related to expression, the right to assemble. So like for example, birthday, right? This is a form of expression. When people get together, it's a form of expression. Now today, we have this law called the Peaceful Assembly Act. All right? But if you look before the Peaceful Assembly Act, it was the Police Act. And there's section 27.
27.
Yes. 27, right? Okay, so section 27 of the Police Act says that if you want to gather, you need to get a permit from the police. All right? And everybody criticized this law because it's so, how should I say, the discretion given to the police was so broad, that they abused it. Now, for me, the law itself is not a problem. If the people who are enforcing the law, and in this case it's the police, if they were to actually understand the background, they would see that the Constitution is very clear. The Constitution says that you have a right to assemble unless it's for violent purposes and unless it's going to disrupt public order and morality. So if the police understood the foundations of our law, which is the Constitution, then if someone requests for a permit, and unless there's evidence that it's going to cause any of these three things, they should give it. But they didn't. They would give a permit to those who are pro-government, they wouldn't give a permit to those who are anti-government. Therefore, the law itself is neutral. It is the enforcement of the law which was bad, because they did not understand the constitutional provisions, nor did they care about it. So, when you ask me that question, right, I think there's we mustn't get too caught up with the idea that you can make a good law. Because right now, what frightens me, what saddens me, is that the very foundations of our rights as human beings is not appreciated or understood by those who make the law and by those who enforce the law.
By saying that, does it mean that we are open to interpret by ourselves and let the restriction, that means like it's open for everyone to interpret how the Constitution to be? Is it like that?
Well, the trouble is, okay, ultimately, when you're talking about interpretation of law, ultimately it has to be the courts. But up until that point, if you have a police force, if you have a government which do not understand or do not appreciate these freedoms, then you're going to have very, very weird kind of situations. Let me give you another example. Right now, because their favorite law, the favorite law that they're using right now is 124B of the Penal Code. 124B says that it is unlawful to do any act which is detrimental to, which undermines parliamentary democracy. Okay? And it says that if you undermine parliamentary democracy in a manner which is unconstitutional or violent, it is a crime. Okay? Now, you think about that, and as ordinary people, we're thinking, okay, what does that mean? Well, if you're thinking about violence, you're thinking about using weapons. Shooting the ministers or whatever it is. Alright? So how come, when someone says, I want the Prime Minister to resign, that is deemed to be undermining democracy? When it's not. But these are the kind of things which people are being charged for. So, you ask me, is it about interpretation? Well, it's about understanding. So when you have enforcers of the law who can't even understand the basic premise of what parliamentary democracy is about, then you're going to have problems. Okay, and that's where we are now. We have those who are in power who do not understand basic fundamental human rights principles and do not appreciate basic fundamental human rights principles. And therefore, that's why we have all these very, very strange, weird situations.
Thank you, Prof. Azmi, for a very insightful response on my question. We move forward with the YB Ramkarpal. So a question for YB. In Malaysian politics, to exercise Article 10, which is the freedom of expression of our constitution, freedom of expression, at the same time, what has stated in Article 152, 153, and 181 are limiting the actions from the government to be neutral. This causes imbalance situation in our policy making, judgments, etc. People who advocate dictatorship are seeking to subvert the foundation of our constitution and invoke as their shield. How can we put a middle ground between these dominant articles versus the right of freedom of expression for people to implement the power balance with the Sedition Act and other acts? Amendment also restrict freedom of expression.
Thank you. Farhan, I think the first thing that we have to note when it comes to those three articles that you pointed out, 152, 153, and 181, they essentially concern Malay rights, the sovereignty of the rulers, and so on. So when you question these rights, there is obviously going to be controversy, which has resulted in the questioning of these three articles itself to be deemed seditious under the Sedition Act. So under Section 3(1)(f) of the Sedition Act, it's deemed, it is a seditious word which are calculated to question these three articles, do have a seditious tendency. So no doubt, the article, the rights or the rights guaranteed under Article 10 is not absolute. I agree, it should not be absolute. That I think is something which is fundamental. All rights do have restrictions, whether you like them or not. But as far as these three articles are concerned, I think there have been, at least two of them have been tested in court. One would be in the case of Mark Coding, where even an MP, can be charged for sedition for things he says in Parliament. The parliamentary immunity is not a defense. So in that case, Mark Coding was found guilty of sedition for questioning Article 152. I think he proposed or suggested that article be either repealed or amended, and that was found to be seditious. He was fined as an MP. And of course, the other one is the case of my late father, Mr. Karpal, where during the Perak crisis in 2009, where the issue of whether a ruler could be brought to court was raised, and there again, this is something which has sort of like created a lot of controversy, and now it is pending in the federal court whether or not that is seditious or not. So no doubt, these three articles are something which, if you were to question, you've got to think twice about questioning. I think that's the reality of it. So when it comes to freedom of expression in Malaysia, I think one very pertinent, significant legislation which needs to be considered is the Sedition Act. I think that has really, instilled a lot of fear in people when they express their views and expressions. Najib himself said, there was a need to repeal it in 2012. Obviously because it's seen to be draconian, it seemed to be abusive, but he takes a complete U-turn. A few years later, and now the Sedition Act has actually been strengthened by amendments recently. For example, now for sedition, the previous law was that you can be fined for an offence of sedition. Now with the new amendments, there's a minimum 3-year jail sentence. So even a first-time offender would be jailed 3 years if he's found guilty of sedition. So these kind of amendments, they sort of like take away a lot of judicial discretion. So like, in the past, the courts had the discretion, to fine you or impose a light sentence, for example, but not after the amendments. So these things, these are matters which are very, it's very disturbing. And it remains to be seen whether or not those amendments will be abused. So, as far as your question is concerned, whether or not these three articles can be questioned, certainly there is restriction on questioning them.
So, when we go back to our topic, which is like Malaysian politics and freedom of expression, how are we going to balance the power when we can't argue the things that we are currently facing it, like those three articles, because how are we going to balance the power? We can't argue it. So how do you face this?
Well, that's the reality of it. That's the law. You can't question it. It's stated in the Sedition Act. Whether you like it or not, that's the law. And so as far as questioning these articles are concerned, I'm not advocating that they be questioned. Let's make that very clear. But if in the event there comes a day that where they can be questioned, I think that would require a constitutional amendment. But for now, I think the law is very clear. You can't question them, and the cases that I cited earlier demonstrate that.
Thank you, Webby. I think it relates back with what Professor Azmi told us just now. It's about restriction, it's about the interpretation, and how we're going to justify the law. So we move next to Maria Chunapova. So last week, we know all about red shirt rally with all derogatory remarks here and there, and even if we recap back with low yard brawl, and then we have per se. So it's about clash between those two opposed views on freedom of expression. So one can simply say that it's an exercise of a right of freedom of expression. And it's more like becoming a competition between who's going to bring the majority voice of Malaysia. So by saying that, how are we going to balance the power? What is the way forward from here? When everyone can talk about their freedom of expression, they can interpret by themselves. So how are we going to mobilize the nation and bring us out from such a conflict?
Thank you. I didn't see ourselves as competing, I think that both the red shirt and the Versailles 4 event has got very different agenda. But I feel that, what has actually happened is that the agenda for Versailles 4 has actually been spun around, where the racial slant becomes the key highlight, without actually understanding that per se we did have our own demands very clearly, and we were very clear about our objectives. But how I see the ratio is that if we follow our constitution, everyone has a right for assembly and of course of expression. But there is also limitation as to the free speech. Yeah. What I see is that the red shirt, the worrying thing is that not to say that they cannot have that rally, but I think that the worrying thing that most people are now discussing is the content that has emerged from the rally, which is filled with racial undertones, very strong racial undertones, and I feel that it actually fuel or is meant to actually underlying it is really to maintain back the support, to show that that there is that support for Najib as a Prime Minister, simply because in reaction to the demands that were being made by per se 4 to ask him to resign. That's one. Two is that, and so therefore using race, using fear, using violence becomes very important in the rally for the racials, because that is what the intimidation is all about. To actually make people feel that they should not even talk about that topic anymore, about the Prime Minister resigning or about democratic reforms. Secondly is that it also acts as a distraction, because the whole purpose of per se 4 came about was really in response to the Wall Street Journal allegations. And everyone, not just per se, everyone was actually expecting some answers with regards to the 1MDB, with regards to the 700 million USD that is in Najib's personal account. The whole rate should act as a distraction. And so now we are in a situation where 1MDB and the 700 million USD have no answer, and we are not even sure when the parliament begins back again in October, will we even have back the task force to continue with its investigation. And now with MACC, one of them that died so brutally, it really creates that climate of fear. So I think that when we are actually talking about in this context, it's always a challenge when we are talking about the freedom of expression. But at the end of the day, we really have to understand that if we are moving towards building a democratic society, then both sides of the coin need to actually sit down to discuss. One good example is what happened in Bayang Paru, where the red shirts actually, we were having a post-per se event, and the red shirts actually just bashed into the whole event. There were only about 100 of us and 30 over of them. But I think that what the parliamentarian did was a good thing. We gave them the platform to speak, to actually allow them to say what it is that they were so angry about, and what is it that they want to say when they want to come into our meeting. And I think that actually calmed down the situation a lot. So I think that if we are moving towards a more democratic framework, then that is the way to actually encourage and engage and to discuss what is it that we are unhappy about with each other. And that is the only way that I see ourselves moving forward. Depending too much on the laws doesn't work too well either, because the law is there, but then the implementation of the law actually really does not help in the human rights, in defending human rights at all. Because like what has been said, there has to be a re-education of what it means by protecting human rights through the laws. So I think that we are getting there, But I think we need to work much, much harder in terms of dialogue with each other and understanding even sensitive issues like race, religion, LGBT. These are issues that we have to confront and to seek some kind of solution, if not some kind of middle of the road kind of discussion. It's a challenge for all of us.
Thank you, Varya. Okay, so we already listened to the panelists just now. We have heard them talking about law and also about the human rights. And so let's open to the floor. I'll let you to ask anything that you want to ask to the panelists. And yeah, please, you can ask the panelists now. We have 3 different scopes, and you can ask whatever you want. It's a freedom of expression. Anyone?
Don't be afraid to express yourself.
Okay. I can listen well because I stay in the front. A simple question, but freedom of expression is about being brave and courageous to speak up what's right within limitation. So will we be living in fear if the power balancing is yet to reach? So you can answer it conceptually or just from layman citizen understanding.
Maybe anyone?
To Prof. Azmi.
Azmi.
Okay, it's that's a very interesting. You phrase it in a very interesting way because you see, human rights. In the mid 1940s, President Roosevelt raised. He said that there are 4 key freedoms that one has to protect: the freedom of expression, the freedom of religion, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. All right, and this is something which is often forgotten. The human rights, one of the aspects of human rights is not just about us doing what we want to do, but about us being able to live without fear. Okay, so you're saying, this fear, will it be around as long as this is imbalance in the law? Well, yes and no, because you're still very young, so you don't remember life before things like smartphones and internet. All right, because I think that we are moving forward a lot in this country. In the 70s, in the 80s, people were really very, very frightened about expressing themselves, even in private. You have people in their living rooms and they're talking about the government and suddenly they lower their voices as if the special branch has nothing better to do but to check every single one of us. But that pervasiveness, that fear is so strong that that this was what's happening. But now I think because people have many different means of communicating with one another, you cannot stop it because it is inherent in us. If we feel that something is wrong, we want to say something about it. So yes, there will always be fear, and this is why they keep doing things to instill that fear. All right, it was a Sedition Act about last year. Now it's 124B of the Penal Code. Before that it was the ISA. All right, they will always find something to make people frightened because nothing pleases an oppressive government more than fear. Because fear is the primary method with which they can use to control you. Because if you're frightened, you wouldn't even speak at all. All right, but I think that's changing. And during the birthday rally, for example, I honestly thought that most people would not wear yellow, and most people would not wear the birthday t-shirts. But everybody did, basically. Right? Because they're not frightened anymore. There's only so far you can go with fear because they cannot catch every single one of us. Of course, ideally, you want a situation where all these radio oppressive laws, 124B, the Sedition Act, the Printing Presses and Publications Act, we want all these laws to be done away with. All right? Ideally. Okay? But until that happens, I don't think we really have a choice. Because nobody said that human rights and democracy were things which are easy. And people have died for it. And I think a little bit of courage, just speaking your mind, is not much to ask.
So no fear.
If I may just add to that, I think the recent Bersih rally, Bersih 4, there were so many fear tactics that were made before the rally even took place. I think things like wearing a Bersih shirt or Bersih t-shirt in itself was obviously calculated to instill fear in people who attended the rally. What they don't realize is by instilling fear in people, you will have people who might not show up at the Bersih rally, but people were very angry and in silent protest. So I think the so-called fear that they have instilled on this silent majority, not minority, has made it. We had what? I think about 400,000, 500,000 people who attended. Was it? About 400,000 to 500,000 people who attended the Bersih rally. But I think the numbers are far greater than that. Far greater than that. And I think, the more they instill fear in us, I think the more people will rise in different manners and different forms. So at the end of the day, like Azmi has just said, fear can't work forever. There will come a time when the people will get fed up of that fear, when there are too many people who are caught in that situation. Then I think there will come a time when all these repressive laws will come to a natural end one day.
I think that this culture of fear has always been with us. It's also related to our education system, and also a system where it actually has to live on this culture of fear in order to survive. So the education system actually teaches us to obey, never to question. Yeah. But I feel that after going through the Bersih 1 to 4, you see the changes. You really see the changes in Malaysians. Actually, even after Bersih 4, we now have 4 persons in jail, 2 in Abu Dhabi and 2 in Dubai, for wearing Bersih t-shirt in a foreign country, okay? And we are trying to see how we are going to get them back again. But the very fact is that they still dare to do it in this country, even though in Bersih 3, 11 students were actually deported and they lost their scholarship. But people in Bersih 4 continue doing it. So there is that process of change that we have come quite a long way in terms of fighting for our rights. And I believe that even if we were to have a change of government, that culture of fear will still be with us. And it will always be a struggle to find space for us to speak, and also space for us to overcome this fear.
Good evening. Is it on? Hello. Thank you. Good evening to all present. My name is Moses Wong, and we have just heard the panel speaking about the politics of fear and intimidation. My question is, how do we keep the spirit of Bersih alive and the issue relevant to Malaysians in the months to come? Because there's always a matter of attention span. Thank you.
I think the short answer to that will be to organize more Bersih.
That's not practical.
That is the reality of it, because if you forget the purpose of Bersih, you'll need to be reminded of it. Probably every 6 months. Then they'll arrest everyone and they won't end up placed in prison. But I think the most important thing is, I think people now are more aware of their rights than ever before. And so when we have a rally like per se, people come there not necessarily just to have fun. They come there to make a point. And when they come to make a point, you know, people from all walks of life came, you know, Malays, Indians, Chinese, and I think that I attended the rally as well. There was a strong sense of camaraderie, you know, brotherhood between all races, all walks of life. I think that's something which we have not seen in Malaysia. Even in the previous per se rallies, I think it wasn't as great as it was in this per se 4. So I think in order to keep that momentum going, and in order to keep that spirit alive, I think what is important is for the leaders to keep you know, the agenda going. Not necessarily by having per se every 2 or 3 weeks. You can't do that, no doubt. But if the need arises, you know, there's nothing wrong with holding another rally again for proper purposes. And I think, you know, having a street assembly is a freedom of expression. That is something which is guaranteed under the federal constitution. So there's nothing to fear in holding a peaceful rally. As long as it's peaceful, it can be held again and again.
See, the thing about per se is that, okay, with all due respect to the per se organizer, is that the reason why it's so big is because it's the one thing which Malaysians identify with protest. It's become a brand name. Berse has become a brand name. Berse is like the one direction of civil society in Malaysia. Everybody knows the band, right? Whether you, you know, I mean, but if you think about it, there's so many other protests which has been organized between Berse 3 and Berse 4. All right, and you know, and I've been to most of them, and some of them would have 50 people. You know, some of them would have 100, some of them would have 300. You know, people are doing things consistently. It's just that per se is huge because everybody recognizes the name. Now, all the people who turned out at per se, right, the hundreds of thousands or whatever, or 20 people if you believe the IGP, right, okay, is that, you know, it's just Maria and her friends. Right, okay? All the people who turned out there, what were the demands of per se? Clean government, clean elections, save the Malaysian economy, all right, and the right to protest, the right to object, and then they kind of added save parliamentary democracy. Now really, were all the people there, let's conservative estimate, let's say 100,000 people, were the 100,000 people there really concerned only about these 5 issues? No, they were concerned about 1MDB, they were concerned about rising cost of living, they were concerned about corruption, they were concerned about dirty politics, they were concerned about racial politics, they were concerned about religious freedom, they were concerned about all sorts of things. So per se was a convenient way to express this anger by gathering together and saying, look, we really don't like you, dude. All right? But it doesn't mean that the issues of Malaysia were the only issues which were on people's minds. So, to answer your question, Malaysia is just one thing. There are many, many other things that you can do on a smaller scale. It's just whether you want to do it or not. You know, if you're concerned about the economy, okay, what? Help the poor. Help with the soup kitchen, for example. Because these are people who are suffering because of mismanagement of the economy. If you're concerned about the freedom of expression, you know, so like even, you know, on a small scale, my faculty, we are organizing education programs with regards to the Constitution. Because the Constitution is so abused, because people in power lie about what the Constitution says or does not say. So we try to counter that by having our own programs. All right? You know, so that's another thing. Freedom of faith, brotherhood. Fellowship with people of the same faith, because you know, because the freedom of faith is being threatened in this country. And I'm not just talking about non-Muslims, even Muslims themselves. Their freedom of faith is being threatened in this country because we are told you can only worship, you can only believe how we want you to believe. You know, so there's all this, so many different things which is happening in this country. Versus just one method of expression. It's a convenient method of expression. It's cute, everybody was yellow. It's convenient, it's there, everybody recognizes it. But I think there's so many more things that we can do on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. And to keep that spirit alive, that spirit of dissent, and that spirit of understanding and appreciating and demanding, not our rights, because our rights are already with us, but demanding the respect of our rights.
Any questions?
Baik, mungkin saya nak tanya sikit berkaitan dengan apa pandangan apabila Sultan ataupun dengan contoh, saya ambil contoh Tukang Kata Johor dimula bercakap tentang politik dan akhirnya nampak seperti dia adalah hero kepada politik. So, apakah pandangan berkaitan? Adakah lebih bagus untuk kita punya demokrasi ataupun diberi kesan yang besar kepada seperti imperialisme yang baru kepada rakyat?
Ya, berkenaan dengan perlibatan sultan atau rulers di dalam arena politik, I think sudah lama kita terima that the sultans are above politics. They are apolitical, and that's the general perception, itu persepsi yang secara amnya lah. So bila baru-baru ini kita ada macam bila Azmi terlibat dalam satu argument dengan loyalty yang dari Johor, itu merupakan isu yang saya katakan ini. Apa yang dia kata is Sultan should never descend to the political arena. So whether you accept that argument or not, I think it is time tested, and has always been the case. So we have enough politicians to deal with who are causing a lot of problems in this country. So as far as I'm concerned, I think Sultan kalau dia nak terlibat di dalam arena politik, it's up to them, but they have a role as sultans as well.
Okay, saya setuju dengan itu, Bob. Masalahnya, kalau Sultan Johor, saya cakap ini dengan segala hormatnya ya. Sultan Johor ke, Sultan Selangor ke, Sultan Perlis ke, kalau dia nak kata sesuatu, sebenarnya dari segi undang-undang tidak ada apa-apa yang menghalang dia. Ya? Tetapi yang penting adalah rakyat Malaysia haruslah sedar bahawa itu hanyalah pandangan beliau. Dan beliau tidak harus mengambil bahagian secara terus-menerus dalam politik kerana mengapa? Sebab kita tidak boleh memilih beliau. Ya, sistem kesultanan ini adalah sistem di mana bapa memberi kedatangan dia dan seterusnya. Jadi mereka tidak dipilih oleh rakyat. Ya, jadi oleh kerana kita hidup dalam satu demokrasi, mustahil ya, dan tidak elok jika seseorang yang kita tidak ada kuasa ya, atas mereka langsung. Seseorang yang kita tidak ada kuasa sebab kita tak boleh mengundi dia keluar. Ya, jadi tidak elok jika mereka ada peranan yang terlalu besar di dalam politik, oleh kerana mereka untouchable. Ya, jadi dengan segala hormatlah saya. Tapi apa yang kita kena ingat orang Malaysia ni dia punya memori pendek. Ya? Tiba-tiba forget the Sultan, tiba-tiba Mahathir jadi hero. Dia pergi Mesir 2 kali, berapa minit je. Kali kedua masuk restoran, tak keluar pun kat bawah panas kan, duduk situ. Tiba-tiba Mahathir jadi hero. Kita berada di dalam keadaan kita ini kerana Mahathir. Siapa yang memusnahkan kehakiman kita? Mahathir. Siapa yang menakut-nakutkan media masa kita? Mahathir. Siapa yang memusnahkan institusi demokrasi kita seperti AGS, Chambers, MBC? Mahathir. Semua Mahathir. Tapi tiba-tiba Mahathir jadi hero. Saya tak tahu apa nak kata. Tak tahu apa nak kata. Dah gila.
I think that they can give their opinions. Yeah. But there must be a line drawn. We don't want a repeat of para. Yeah. We don't want a repeat of para where there is direct interference. So as far as I'm concerned, it is those that we get elected. Actually, we will hold them accountable, and they have to actually do what the voters want. And let us keep to that, because that is the democracy that we want to fight for. I think that go ahead, they can give their opinion, but let's draw a line as to what is the democracy that we are actually fighting for. I mean, for Mahathir, I think, thank you very much for coming. But we will not also forget that we landed where we are because of him. Yeah. And that's very serious, because I think that he actually destroyed our judiciary. He made us into a one party and keep it as it is. And the whole thing about the centralization of the federal power, that is something that is the inheritance of Mahathir, where Prime Minister holds the post of Finance Minister. That came from him. Let us not forget about that.
Just to add to Mahathir, since I didn't have a chance to. On Mahathir, I think that relates back to your question earlier about fear. You know, I think fear, this culture of fear, it all started during his time. Operation Lalang, 1987, 1988, the judiciary, the crisis of the judiciary, it's all during his time. All during his time. And that is what, and I don't think, you know, I'm not that old, but before his time, things were not like that. So, for him to suddenly, like Azmi has pointed out, become a hero overnight, just because he attended the birthday rally, I think he certainly is not justified. He certainly has contributed a lot to the culture of fear in this country.
Just a very light story. I don't know whether you know, but Ram and myself, we're both Penang boys. Ram is a lot younger than me. He doesn't look it, but he's a lot younger than me. But I was in school with his older brothers. Okay, and I tell you, in the 80s, they're talking about this culture of fear. I remember there was once on a wall by the side of the road, graffiti, said Mahathir Mohamad MD, and in brackets, Malaysian dictator. Okay, I'm not accusing anyone of writing this graffiti on the wall on the street in Penang, but I just want to say that it was very close to their house. So I'm not sure whether his brothers were involved, but it was very near to their house.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Thank you for the response. It's going to be interesting here. Yeah, finally, before this, we keep always blaming Anwar, like Semua Salah Anwar. Today we listen to new terms like Semua Salah Hadir. It's a good thing. I think we still have time. One more question. Anyone? Yeah. Last one.
If one day
we need Malaysia, we need Malaysia, is it freedom is still available to them? Okay, kalau satu hari kita meminta Malaysia, adakah keputusan itu?
Opposition.
Ya, di Malaysia, adakah kebebasan tu masih, kebebasan politik tu masih ada untuk mereka?
Mereka tu siapa?
To against us lah, when we
when we win.
Huh?
When we win,
Yeah.
what do we do to them?
No. When we win, is it freedom is still available to them?
Of course.
Boleh jawab.
Of course. Kalau kita betul-betul menghormati kebebasan, kita menghormati kebebasan untuk semua orang. Dan ini adalah perbezaannya antara bersih misalnya dengan perkumpulan baju merah tu. Sebab satu daripada permintaan perkumpulan baju merah itu adalah bahawa semua perhimpunan bersih di masa depan akan diharamkan. Jadi mereka tidak ada masalah untuk berkumpul. Mereka tidak ada masalah untuk mengatakan bahawa hak untuk berkumpul bagi diri mereka terdapat dalam perlembagaan. Tetapi mereka tidak mahu hak itu untuk orang lain. Sebab mereka tak setuju dengan orang lain. Ini maksudnya mereka ini jahat. Ya, kerana satu cerita lain kan. Walaupun kita tidak suka apa seseorang itu menyatakan, pada pendapat saya, kita haruslah, kalau kita betul-betul serius dengan hak asasi manusia ini, kita harus mempertahankan haknya untuk mengatakan apa yang dia nak kata. Seperti mana apa dia falsafah Perancis kata, I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Dan itulah perbezaannya antara orang baik dan orang jahat.
Sama juga, if I may just add kepada yang dikatakan oleh Azmi. Like for example, Akta Hasutan, we call for its abolishment, not because it's used only against opposition or mainly of opposition leaders, but even if it's used against Barisan Nasional or government leaders, our stand is the same. Dia patutnya dihapuskan, it ought to be dimansuhkan, and that applies across the board. So if the opposition came into power in the next election, I don't see why there should be double standards. It should apply across the board.
Just to add, I think that it's not just about the freedom. If the opposition were to come in, we would still be the check and balance on that. Whether if they are going to be corrupt, they are going to abuse the laws, and they are going to use the police to their advantage, we will still condemn them, and we will still have mercy. Yeah, maybe other people will have the mercy. But I think that, that is part of the democracy, that you continue monitoring and you continue being the check and balance, because you will never get an absolute democracy even when the opposition comes in. I can bet you that.
Sorry, just to give you a beautiful quote daripada Thomas Jefferson, dia kata, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Kita, kalau just because the opposition wins doesn't mean our battle is over. It continues. Freedom is not cheap.
One last question, please.
Two last questions.
Okay. Right. This morning there was the panel of discussion, and I'd like to recap what was said by Fatih Aris of Malaysia Kini and now with Malay Mail. He used two keywords, ketakutan dan kehilangan. And I would like to use this to describe the absence of all the minority of Malays in the rally. I'd like to know what is the response, how do we overcome, how do we help our fellow Malays, to overcome this psychological state, because we know that the Prime Minister has removed the DPM, removed other potential leaders to replace him, so there is the fear that BN will collapse, and therefore Malays are holding back because they don't want BN to collapse. So what is the audience view on this? How do we help our fellow Malays, to overcome this ketakutan dan kehilangan?
I think my question is along the same lines. Because Bersih has been racialized, and how the Red Shirts rally is racist. Seeing that, how can we stop the dissemination of racism as being stated by the government or whatever about Bersih? How do we stop that being disseminated when we have our own racial issues that are still ongoing right now, and also taking into account that we live in a society where we think everyone is everybody's out there to get us, So how do we stop that being?
I think that just a quick response. seriously, we need to speak out. I mean, the whole purpose of the red shirt is really to suppress dissent. Yeah, to actually use fear, race, and the Malay, Ketuanan Melayu, and all that kind of argument to actually suppress us. And we should not subject ourselves to that. Because I think that, you know, if more of us were to speak up and say that, no, Verse 4 was not about race, Verse 4 was actually about democratic reform, that will make a change. And if you say that, you know, how do we help the Malays, don't forget that other races are also in the state of fear. Okay? What we see on that day, yeah, a lot more Chinese came out. But then it doesn't, we shouldn't also discount the Malays and the Indians who also turn up. But it's just that there are just too many Chinese that you don't feel the presence there. But I feel that, you know, the fear factor or the inability to come out to a street protest doesn't mean that they do not support democratic reform either. Because we are assuming that those who don't come actually don't support Verse 4. It may not be in that kind of logic. It could be because there are so many, you're worried about your career, you worry about basically just fear of being in the streets, you worry about your future, there's so many other things that that actually bothers people. Or you support but you don't want to go on the streets. Yeah, that's also a possibility. But I feel that it shouldn't be just a highlight on just the Malay, although that may be a bigger factor. But what about Sabah, Sarawak? We forget that they also came out, you know. They came out in support of Verse 4, 3,000 in Sabah and 4,000 in Sarawak. Those are also the indigenous people of Malaysia. But of course, we still need to work harder. And it shouldn't be the responsibility of Verse 8. It now has to be the responsibility of every Malaysian. Because if we don't do it, we can have many Verse 8 and we'll still be talking about the same issue. But we don't want to do that anymore. We want to actually move on. Move on means everyone must do your part. And not say that, you know, it's Verse 8's responsibility to reach out to the Malays or to the rural areas. But it's each and everyone's responsibility to think of different ways to reach out. It need not be a roadshow. It can be just talking to your friends, going back to the couple and talking to people. There are so many creative ways that we can think if we put our heads together. Immediately, of course, Verse is having a roadshow, and we're having a training of trainers to invite people who want to join us as speakers or just to help around. We are having it in October, and if you all are interested, just write in. But this is a start. There are many other ways that we can actually do, and social media, don't discount that as well.
I think the key to combat racism is education. And if we can educate the Malays or whoever who thinks on racial lines effectively, then I think we are in the right direction. So, like Maria said, it's not only about Verse. They are not the only ones who have a responsibility to educate the public. We have, all of us as individuals bear that responsibility. And as far as the red shirt rally is concerned, I don't think it's reflective of the Malay psyche, generally. I think generally Malays are not racist people, although their minds can be poisoned to that effect. But I think generally more and more Malays are beginning to be more aware of current issues, especially when issues which affect them, bread and butter issues, which are now, in the spotlight. You have things like 1MDB, you have the currency problem, the currency that doesn't seem to be getting any better. These are matters which affect the ordinary Malay. And these are the things which are beginning to make them wake up, if I may use that phrase. So I think the key to it all at the end of the day is we all have a part to play to educate, not only the Malays, but those who think on racial lines, whether you're Malay, Indian or Chinese. I think it's all up to us.
The first thing is don't rise to the bait. Don't rise to the bait. Okay, as tempting as it was, when all this Ali Tinju and whatever this idiot's name is, okay, kata, oh, what's wrong with panggil Cina babi kan, dia makan babi, okay, Melayu lembu. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I was going to go around, hang lembu, hang kambing, hang ayam, whatever. But don't rise to it. The point is, whatever we do, all right, for me, the way civil society should move forward is we must fight for what is right and what is just. Forget about the race card. Just keep on fighting for what is just and what is right, and eventually people will see that what we're doing is correct. No matter what happens to us, you just keep on going. When I say I want to help, for example, I believe in affirmative action. But I believe in affirmative action for everyone. Everyone who deserves it has to be helped. Alright? I don't raise the race card. Eventually people will see, apa salah dengan benda tu? Apa salahnya? That's the first thing. And there's just because there's, if you think about it, right, the thing is when things are publicized, like whatever, be it Bersih or the Racial Rally, that is what's in people's minds. But the Merdeka Center poll carried out found that 25%, only 25% of Malays supported the Racial Rally. 75% were against it. That's a vast majority. Okay? That's another thing that we have to keep in mind. See, because the thing is, right, we always get the negative stuff and then we feel, yeah, everything is terrible. But it's not necessarily true. Okay? Another thing is, with regards to what we can do, we get our facts right. So if we hear bullshit, you must be able to point out that it's bullshit. For example, tanah reserve Melayu diambil. Okay, kalau tanah reserve Melayu diambil, dia diambil oleh siapa? Every single state yang ada tanah reserve Melayu is governed by a Malay Menteri Besar. And a Malay cabinet, or primarily Malay cabinet. The only one state which doesn't have a Malay Menteri Besar is Penang. And in Penang there is no tanah reserve Melayu. So siapa yang ambil tanah reserve Melayu? Melayu yang ambil tanah reserve Melayu. So any bullshit must be countered. So we educate ourselves in order to counter the rubbish. Okay, so I think this is what we have to do. And we mustn't lose hope, because I honestly think that most people don't care about this rubbish. Most people just want to make a decent living for their children. And I think an inherent sense of what is fair and what is right isn't too difficult to tipulkan. Any country will have races. Of all races, people are nasty. There will always be nasty people. But let us not fall into the trap of believing everybody is nasty.
That's all for our session today. We'd like to thank you for all the inputs from our respective panelists. We have required a lot of hard work. Ingat, atasi ketakutan untuk mengelakkan kita daripada terus diperalatkan. So lawan ketakutan. Yeah. I end today's session with a quoting from George Washington: "If the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be left, like sheep to the slaughter." So with that, I would like to thank you.
Baik, terima kasih kita ucapkan kepada semua panelis dan juga panelis